Unleash the power of purpose with impactful business voices, hosted by Nancy Baki and Anita Larsen. Each week, you'll be inspired by stories from companies that are making a real difference in the world, and you'll learn practical tips on how to grow your business with an impact.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back, or welcome for the first time if you haven't listened to our Impactful Business Voices podcast previously. Every week, we talk to business owners that makes an impact on the world, in their communities, in the lives of their clients or the people around them. And we just show up here to find out what drives them and really hope that it inspires you and others to make an impact in your life. So we are your hosts. I'm Anita Larsen.
And I'm Nancy Baki. And guys, today we are diving deep in the future of parenting. We're really thrilled to have Sarah Schindler. She's from Mama Bliss. Can you imagine a world where we don't just follow the age-old norms, but really we're reframing how we connect with our children? Sarah, she champions emotional intelligence, authenticity, and those deep bonds that redefine parenting. So if you're looking for a way to bring more peace, play, holistic wellness into your home, you're in the right place. Let's get started with this enlightening conversation. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Hi, welcome. It's great to meet you, Sarah. We haven't met previously, so I'm excited to learn so much more about what you do. And we're just going to dive right in here. But what I do know of you is that you describe yourself as a cognitive parenting coach and you're a certified holistic health coach. So can you start out just go into a little more detail about what does that mean and how do you help parents?
Yes. Well, cognitive parenting is, I deal a lot with neuroscience and how the way our brain works and the developmental stages of children, how that impacts the child and how it impacts us as parents. And when we understand that, it brings in a lot more patience and a lot more understanding as to what stage our child is in, because a lot of times we expect them to act like adults and they don't. And it's not just their age, like their brain literally is not developed as an adult's brain. So understanding that brings in a lot more compassion and less frustration for us, because it's like, oh, well, that's how they can operate. And here's some tools on what we can do to help with that. And then the holistic health coaching is, just bringing in holistic wellness into the lives of families. And sometimes there's just little tiny things that we can tweak within the lifestyle choices that can make a huge impact on the family dynamic.
Yeah. You said something to me the other day, Sarah, that really touched my heart. I mean, we're all three of us are parents, right? And moms. And you said, what I do is not just helping the parent when there's a problem. It's really also helping them before there's problems. I really love that. So, as business owners, if you're okay to talk about business owners who are also parents, right? All three of us. How does the busy life of a business owner impact their parenting and connections with their children? And what can they do to improve their connection?
That's a great question. It's a little bit loaded because it's very individual. And depending on how you see your business and your parenting dynamic, what that looks like, can impact on the connection that you have with your kid. So for example, if it feels really stressful to be a parent and a business owner and like juggle all the hats, then that's what you're going to get. Whereas if you can step back and see like, okay, well, here's the parenting, here's the business, how can I integrate it and work within, depending on what your business is, if you work out of the home or in the home, are your kids home with you, are they in school? So again, it's very individual to the family, but it's all a mindset stance. Like, how are you seeing it and what is overwhelming you and why is that overwhelming you? And kind of unpacking that, like, where is this overwhelm coming from and how can we reframe that? And sometimes it takes some releasing of some energy that's just like clogging us, and shifting that out so that you can just have that release and then you see it completely different and it changes the whole dynamic.
Yeah, and it makes sense. I mean, there's so many different families with different situations, so one won't work with the other. So yeah, no, that's a great answer. Really appreciate that.
Yeah, I can absolutely see how that would be very personal, individualized to you, and the age of your children, your family environment. There's so many factors to play into that. So your approach, you call it next generation parenting. What does an ideal next generation family environment look like, and what does that approach entail?
First of all, it includes a lot more fun and less stress and overwhelm.
That's
Because
good.
I think we miss that mark so often because we're just so like in it, and we've got to do this, and we got to go here, and we got to do that, and it just takes the fun out of it. So like letting that be a main part of your day is having fun. Self-care, and really the big thing is just not conforming to what society thinks, not conforming to the way that, why do you parent the way that you parent? Are you doing that because that's how you were parented? Are you doing that that's because that's how you were told to parent? Does it even feel aligned with you and your personal values? What does that look like for you? And it's not going to look the same for me as it does for you. I mean, there are some general principles across the board that work for everybody, but how you approach those is going to be different for each family. Again, it's very individual, but it's standing up for what you believe in and not just saying like, oh, okay, well, you're this quote unquote authority, so I'm just going to go ahead and back down and do what you think I should do, even though it feels off. And really becoming an advocate for your family and for yourself.
Yeah,
But if I can ask a follow-up to that too, because that, speaking from my limited parenting experience, I mean, I have one teenager, and I just, from being a parent, everybody has those days where you're like, it feels wrong what you're doing no matter what you do, right? You never know how you are supposed to parent. But sometimes feeling wrong about what you do is also the right way, because you can't always be your child's best friend, and you have to look at things long term and make sure you set the right examples, even though you really just want to coddle them. So how do you navigate those feelings with a feeling of what should I be doing and what's the right way of doing it, I guess, is the question.
That again goes to understanding the brain development and where they are in that stage, and noticing language. Language makes a huge difference, and that's part of the prior to the problem. The way that we word things can eliminate a lot of problems, quote unquote problems. And so and I like to work with parents like right away, because once you practice this language, like some of the things I tell people to tell a 2-year-old, the 2-year-old is not going to cognitively understand this, but it gets you in the practice of saying things in a certain way. So when they can understand it, it's second nature, and you're not having to like work so hard to do it. But when we can speak to them in a way, like teenagers, for example, a lot of, they have a lot of toddler-like behaviors, but they're bigger and they have more of an opinion, right?
Sorry, I'm like laughing at that.
True. Very
I'm
true.
thinking of the situations, and it's so right.
Yeah. And so like what we think we should do is like teenagers should be doing this, and they should know better, and they should be acting like an adult, and why don't they know better, and why aren't they getting up, and why do they want to sleep so much? And it's all this like, why aren't they doing things that they should be doing? And so in our head, we think that they're wrong, and they're going to be these horrible, lazy human beings who are going to be adults that are going to be on our couches forever. And that's really not the case. I mean, hopefully, but again, it's all our language and how we're treating them and how we're guiding them, because we're guides. We're not here to determine who they are to be and what they're here to do. We're here to guide them and teach them and show them how to be a human. What are you actually representing? This is like just an easy example of being a example, but like I tell my kids, like, clean up your toys before you move on to the next thing. But here I am with dirty dishes, and I'm like, but let's go to the park. Like I didn't do the dishes before we went to the park because this was the time we could go to the park. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to spend the time doing the dishes. But then, like to them, they're like, well, you're not doing it. Why am I doing it? Why are you making me do these things? So noticing those things, and then why does a child have resistance?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the teenagers notice. They are going to notice those things. I say, do what I say, not what I do.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to come back to the business owners a little bit, because that's a lot of a lot of our audience, they're business owners, and as a small business owner, juggling both professional and parent responsibility, how can the principles of next generation parenting really be integrated to achieve a work-life harmony?
It's, again, language is huge. It's the foundation. I heard a quote, Peter Crone, I don't know if you're familiar with him. He says language is the wardrobe for the soul. And so it's how we represent ourselves. It's how when we're saying things, there's a lot of power. There's frequency in our language. You can say, get me some water, or could I please have a glass of water? Which one's going to inspire you to actually help somebody? So the language that we have with our kids, and the language we have with ourselves, and the language we have about the business parent dynamic will completely shift the way that it's in your home. And so what are you saying, and what are you thinking, and what are you believing about any struggles that you may be experiencing? And those struggles are real, and they're important, and they're valid, whatever that may be. And there's a lot of guilt. I should be with my kids more, or I'm spending all this time on my business. I don't know if either of you have had this thought, but it's like, oh, I just wish I had a regular job where I know my hours and I'm not working outside of hours. And, like I've had those moments of frustration where I feel like, oh, my kids are going to be like, I'm always on a call or always on my phone. But it's organizing and prioritizing. And a lot of what we do, especially because you guys attract business owners who are making an impact in the world, obviously with your title, and what our kids are watching, and we forget this part, is they are watching us make an impact on the world. Like my daughter's 5 and she's like, I want to help other moms like you do, Mom. And it's so cute, but she'll draw pictures of me. My husband told me just a couple weeks ago, she was drawing a picture of me at my desk when they were hanging out one day. And, you could either feel like, oh my gosh, all she sees is me at my desk all the time. Or you could think she knows I'm making an impact and I'm helping other parents, because she even, we saw somebody yelling at their kid, or she yelled at like a big group of kids. And my kids were like, oh my gosh, because they're just not used to being talked to that way. And they're like, why did she say that? I said, she just doesn't understand. She doesn't practice the way that we do. She goes, you need to teach other parents how to talk like that. And I said, and so she sees this, and my son too. And so we have to remember that they see us making an impact on the world. And how are we speaking about our business around them? Are we talking about how frustrated and overwhelmed and how we feel guilty about being on the phone and being on calls and always doing these things? Or are we talking about actually what we're doing when we're in our businesses? Because that's what's important. Because the talking about how overwhelmed we are with our business, again, that's our language. And that's what they're going to hear. That's what they're going to pick up. When they hear like, wow, this is what it takes to make an impact, maybe they're going to be inspired to do something similar themselves that's aligned for them.
And you know what you said about your daughter, I know she's 5 or 6, right? Is that how old she is?
She's almost 6.
Yeah, my daughter's 15. It still happens. Sometimes she'll go to somewhere and she's like, why is that parent talking to their kid like that? And she'll bring that, like, how come, like things like that. So yeah, I mean, the world needs a lot of help in the parenting. I definitely agree with that.
And it's default. Most people are running on default, and it's taking a step back and rewinding and rewiring how we're doing that. And it makes such a big difference. And it's small things. It's not this massive overhaul. It's just these little things that we can do that make a huge difference.
No, you're right. It's those small little tweaks that we do that makes because I know I've done lots of tweaks as I learned from you and other, from other parents that I've seen, and I'm like, oh gosh, I got to do that a little bit differently. And when I do it, it might be hard in the beginning because I'm not used to it, but then after that, there's joy for both sides. So I love that.
Yeah, and I love what you said about what kind of examples we're setting, being business owners, and if especially, working from home like we do and being able to work virtually. And yes, we spend a lot of time at work, and work is in our home and they see a lot of it. But at the same time, I'm always grateful for the flexibility to spend like special times with my daughter and being able to shift my schedule to have those quality moments, especially when she was like in elementary school, and, special days where they need the parents representing and you can't necessarily take off of work. Well, if you run your own business, you are in charge of that. And it's important to be able to take that time out and prioritize what's important to you and your family. So having that flexibility is, you can't beat that, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So my daughter is like, so what do you actually do, Mom? What, you're like a girl boss? I'm like, sure. I'll take that. I'll present myself as that. So yeah, it's all about the example you said.
Yeah.
You mentioned traditional parenting and how other people parent. So if there was like one core belief or parenting practice from traditional parenting that you would like to completely reinvent, what would that be?
That we're the boss, that they always have to do what we say. Because sometimes what we say, there's a Bible verse that says, children, obey your parents. But what if the parent isn't actually right? What if the parent is operating in a space that is negative and not healthy, and then they're telling the child to do something, even with love? They feel like this is the way to do it and you have to do it this way. And that's authoritarian parenting. It's like, well, what if the parent isn't always right in that moment? And they are in a space of anger, and you need to do what I say right now because that's what parents do and that's what children do. It's not serving our children, and it's not serving us. There are so many other ways to go about that. And yes, we want our children to obey us and to respect us, but it's like sometimes I've said things to my kids and they know that they can question me. I've taught them, like, you're allowed to ask questions if I ask you to do something. And there's been quite a few times that I've said to do something and I've been like annoyed that they're not doing it. I'm like, guys, we need to get this done. And they're like, why? And I'm like, you know what? I don't even know why. Like, there's really, or I'll be angry and I'm like, if you don't stop that, I'm going to take this away. And then I'm like, that was dumb. Like, there's no like real, they're not going to get any real, they think about the thing that was taken away, not the action that was done. So they think about the punishment, whatever the punishment is, not really what the best choice is in the moment. And so if we're like, if you don't clean your room, I'm taking away, you can't go to the party this weekend. Well, that's one, that they don't correlate. Like, the punishment doesn't fit the crime. Two, sometimes it punishes us as well. And we're just saying it out of anger and we don't know what else to say. And so it's like, it's just being, I'm the boss, I want you to do this, and we don't know what else to do. So it's finding those other tools and other ways of saying, sometimes it is kind of saying the same thing, but in a completely different way. Back to the water. Get me a glass of water versus, may I please have a glass of water? How are you inspiring them to actually want to listen to you? And so that I'm the boss, do what I say right now, it's just not serving us. And it's causing a lot of resistance. And the way we treat our kids as toddlers is the way they treat us as teenagers.
Yeah. And like you guys said earlier, and I live by this, it's whatever they say and whatever they hear.
Yeah.
They assume that they can do it too. So if, just for example, we don't do this, but me and my husband, if we have an argument out loud and the kids are right there, they're going to think it's okay. So we don't do it anymore. Now we need to communicate. We don't argue anymore. We just go for a walk or, something like that. And it makes such a huge difference.
Right. If you're always on your phone and you're like, you can't have screen time. And they're like, well, why are you on your phone? Well, I'm working. You're just trying to play. They're like, but to them, they're like, but what's the difference? Like,
Absolutely.
they don't understand.
Absolutely.
And, yeah. So.
And talking about phone, I mean, I'll go one way, like dinner. Like, there is no phone at dinner. There is no iPad. It's back in your room or where it's supposed to be, right? But in the era where, right now digital connection is everywhere, right? How do you advise parents to maintain that authentic connection with their kids? with all this digital that's going around, like the TikTok and the I don't know what, and the Snapchat and all these things that these kids are doing?
That's an excellent question. One, you just said it at dinner, like just have one time a day where you're all together, no devices. Nobody's allowed to have a device. I've been at dinner with other families and like one of the parents is on the phone the whole time, so it's like, well, of course their children are going to be that way as well. But just have some time, even if it's not dinner, because sometimes I know people, like especially in the teenage realm, like there's sports and you're going and you're doing things and people are doing different activities at different times. If there's one day a week, you can have Sunday dinner or Wednesday dinner, I don't know, whatever works sometime. And if you can do it just once a day, like in the mornings when we're getting ready for school, no screens. Why do you need screens for that hour that I don't know any child who's getting up like 3 hours prior to having to be out of the house for school, unless they go to school late, right? Because usually school's what, you got to be there at 8:15, 8:30. So they're not waking up at 5 a.m. So in that time frame, like no screens for anybody, not you, not them, unless it's an alarm, or maybe some music. You can play music, something like that. Like come up with some sort of guideline around that to just have some chill time or prior to going to bed. There's different ways you can do that to connect more in that way. Did that answer the question? I feel like
it did, because digital, it's not going away. It's actually getting worse, right? Every day it's just getting worse and worse. Today's Snapchat, TikTok, tomorrow it's going to be, another one, and they're going to all, there's Discord, and I'm like, what are these things? Like, I'm not even on there. They know more about us. I mean, that's what the pandemic also did, right? It got them to know things because that's all the time that they had to do. So yeah, no, you more than answered it for sure.
Yeah. Well, and it also brings me to not conforming. Well, just because every other 12-year-old has a phone, is that aligned for you to give your child a phone because every other parent gives their 12-year-old a phone? Are they just parenting by default? And so now you're parenting by default because they're all doing it? Like what's actually aligned for you? Playing certain video games, doing certain things. There are no screens an hour before bedtime because screens keep us awake. There's a lot of scientific, it brings blue light into our eyes and makes us think that the sun, the same blue light that's in the sun, the screens go into our eyes and tell our brain it's still daylight, it's still daytime. So it's harder for them to go to sleep. So if you eliminate screens scientifically, 90 minutes for every person, 90 minutes before bedtime, you should have no screens whatsoever. That's not really realistic for a lot of people, but for children, let's make it realistic because again, it's not, I'm the boss, this is the rule. It's, hey, this is actually what's going to be helpful for you and your body, and sleep is extremely important. And I want to make sure you're having the proper amount of sleep. So let's put all our phones in the kitchen or have a certain spot at a certain time, things like that, because otherwise we're conforming to what other people are doing and it's harming our kids. It's harming us and it's disconnecting. It's creating a disconnect from humanity, I think, especially with screens. They're beautiful and we wouldn't be able to do this without technology. I think it's such a gift to be able to have these opportunities, but just with anything, like I love chocolate, but if you eat chocolate all day, you're going to get sick, like it's the same principle. And so it's up to us as parents, just because other people are doing it, what's the best for you and your family, and let's not conform to what everybody else is doing.
You bring such an important point, because I mean, this is parenting, this is business, this is in a lot of different things, right? Like in our clients in business, not to go off topic, it's like, okay, businesses, you're doing exactly what the competition is doing and it's not working for them. So what are you going to do different? The same thing with the parenting. I may see 5, 6 parenting teaching their kids one way, and I'm like, that doesn't work for me. It's okay to go a different way because, so don't copy the other parents. Find what works for you, because every child, every parent is different.
And you were talking about kind of setting those guidelines and setting boundaries, which, we have to do that. So like I said, it doesn't mean we have to be the boss, but we are here to set boundaries and guidelines and teach them what's right and what's wrong and what's good for them and what's not. So how can you be that guide and in some ways disciplinarian and still sort of foster that emotional intelligence in them at the same time? I'm kind of anticipating you're going to go back to language and how you speak with them and explain it again, but can you elaborate on that?
That is part of it, but really the first thing that I would say is, how aligned are you as a person? What's your connection look like with God, with yourself? How connected are you with yourself? Again, are you in default mode all the time? So based on how we're connected, body, mind, and spirit, if you've been sitting at a desk all day, all week long, and you haven't been outside and you haven't taken the time for yourself to do any kind of prayer or meditation or any sort of self-care, you're not going to be able to guide your child in a way that's beneficial. Mm-hmm. So that would be the first thing, is to start with you. Like, self-care is so important. It's the fill your cup, put on your oxygen mask before they do. That whole analogy, I'm sure most of your listeners have heard that one before. But it's so important. It's true that if we're not taking care of ourselves, when I'm tired and I'm hungry and I'm feeling neglected myself, I'm snappier. I can't handle things in the same way that I can when I feel calm and relaxed. And so I incorporate a lot of different practices into my life. Some days I'm not great at it. I go weeks without being great at it sometimes, but I notice a huge difference and I'm not the parent I want to be. So that's what would be the first thing, because that's going to help you have boundaries that are actually aligned with you. Do you know what your true values are for you as an individual and for you as a family? If you're making decisions based on those values, you're going to feel good about it, even if it doesn't feel good to do it in the moment. Because when we set boundaries, we don't have to like setting the boundary, and they don't have to like the boundary. That goes with our kids, that goes with our spouses, it goes with our coworkers, it goes with anybody we interact with, our family members. Like, sometimes we have to set boundaries and we have to say no, and we have to be like, I'm just tired and I love you, but I don't want to meet you for coffee this weekend because I want to just like chill. And that's okay. The person might feel disappointed and might not like that you don't want to go hang out with them this weekend. But also, if they're a good friend, they'll understand that you need your space, and they'll feel disappointed. Same with our kids. They don't have to like the fact that you're not going to give them a bowl of ice cream 5 minutes before bedtime. But that's the boundary. That's, it's just a silly example, but that's the boundary. And you don't have to like the way that they react. And it's like, it's okay to feel upset about not having that thing, or not being able to go to that party, or not being able to do this, whatever it is you want to do that I'm saying you can't. It's okay. You don't have to like that. And I don't have to like your reaction. You're totally entitled to your feelings about the boundary.
It's so true. It's and I so resonate with what you said. If you don't take care of yourself, you're not in a good place or a good mood, you are not going to react well and interact well with your children. And I'm sure we've all had those examples where you snap because you have things going on. I even had my daughter tell me one time I snapped to her, and she could hear me in the office, and she's like, just because you had a bad meeting doesn't mean you should come back and snap at me. And that's like your words coming right back at you, because I've told her, just because you're having a bad day, you don't have to take it out on anybody else. So that's when, again, when they become teenagers, all your words come back at you. So you got to watch what you do and the examples you set, right?
Mm-hmm. You're so right, Anita. I'm hearing that too in my background as well. Sarah, I know you've got lots of success stories, different clients that you've worked with. Can you share a success story where, reframing parental viewpoints really resulted in a positive change in their home?
Yes. Let me think of, do you want, I've worked with parents with different ages. Is there a specific age that you would like to have an example?
Do you want to go with teenager for the moment?
Okay, yeah, because like a toddler versus a 20-year-old versus a teenager is going to be a little bit.
Well, I'm not choosing a teenager only because we have teenagers, but I'm just thinking of business owners that we think that I personally know and Anita knows, they're in the teenage world right now, most of them. But I know you work with toddlers and teenagers. So if you have a little example for both, hey, go for it.
Okay, I'll start with a teenager then. I have one who she was having issues with friends at school and was in a group, like a couple of the friends were actually good friends and a couple of the friends were kind of catty and talked about people, and she would join in but didn't feel good about it, and she just didn't like it, and she was having trouble at school, and she was just having a lot of, she was in that preteen into teenager. I worked with her through 12 to 13, and just a lot of just like, who am I? What am I doing? Kind of thing. But she actually is very, very mature. I think our kids are a lot more mature than we give them credit for. But her mom was just so amazing, because I was working with her mom and then was working with her one-on-one as well. And so having worked with her mom helped her mom to be able to help with the language with her. And it's a lot of listening. We want to fix, and this goes for any age, but especially in the teenage years and early 20s, like we want to fix it and we want to take away their pain and we want to help them. And really, they just want to listen a lot of times. And so stepping back and listening to them, first of all, validating however they feel, even if we think it's absolutely ridiculous. We have to validate because it's real to them. And so she started to see herself in a completely different way and learning different information about like who she is, and just helping her guide her through those things. She set a boundary with the mean girls, quote unquote, the mean girls. And she said, I just can't be friends with you anymore. And however she phrased it, and she blocked them from her phone. And so because it was causing a lot of stress in her life, and it wasn't necessary. And she realized that, and she was really brave. I was so proud of her that she was so brave enough to do that, because that's a big deal at 13. You've been my friend they've been friends at least 3 years, as far as I know. And to be like, I just can't do this anymore. It was a really big deal. And so I was really proud of her.
Yeah. And it's great. That one little thing that she taught is so big for her, and she's now going to take it for the rest of her life.
Mm-hmm.
I think every teenager goes through something, and it's important to know what to do with it and not just assume that they're going to be dealing with it on their own.
Mm-hmm.
Just like the situation. It's an amazing story. And guess what? As we all three know, this is the daily life of high school.
Yeah.
I hear that same story everywhere. I don't hear the same story. I hear the same sob story. I don't hear the great ending. Because a lot of kids are still suffering. They're still in their little bubble. They're all that. I mean, I could go and talk about that for days.
Right.
But yeah, no, that's an awesome story. And this was this year you were working with her, last year?
This year, yeah.
And do you see her now developing and growing as she's going?
Yeah, she's gaining a lot more confidence. We're still working together, and she's getting more confident, and she's real sweet. It's really fun to see her growth. And I tell her all the time, I'm like, I am just so proud of you for being able to see this, like she'll ask these questions and she'll say these things, and her mom's on the calls with us. It's not just, just she and I. And so it's this really cool thing, because then her mom gets to see a different side of her, and it's really connected the two of them in a different way, because I work with her mom one-on-one and then work with her, the three of us together. And so it's just this really cool dynamic that's shifted for them, and they've become closer and started listening. And and even sometimes I'm like, hey, even if your mom says something, you get to set boundaries and you get to ask questions. And telling her that, and, because I'm working with her mom's okay with me saying that. And she gets it, and she's like, yeah, you can call me out, because she's working through her own things. It's a lot of reparenting ourselves so that we can become better parents for them. Mm-hmm. Because if we didn't have a great childhood, or we just didn't have a great example, or even if we had a great childhood, sometimes some of the things that we saw or taught or believed carry through into adulthood. And sometimes it's not even valid, because the times have changed so much. Mm-hmm. We can't say, well, when I was a kid, this happened, blah, blah, blah. When I was a kid, we didn't have technology. So
Well,
I'm not
well,
old.
yeah, that's 20.
So it's like I can't parent the same way because it's a different world. We can't parent the same way that our parents parented us. It's a completely different world.
We all know how much we hated when our parents said how things were when they were young and what their parents did. So, yeah.
I know you're going to bring a toddler story. Do you have one? I don't know. I mean, I know kids, parents that have kids 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. And I think that, and tell me if I'm wrong, you know more about parenting. I mean, we're all parents, but you know more about it because you're studying it and working it. But, that 0 to 7 years old is where you're really shaping that child for their future.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's harder, I find, with or maybe it's a little easier. I guess I'm going to leave that in your hands. It's a toddler story.
It depends on us whether it's harder or easier. If we're aware and we're conscious, that's why the conscious parenting is the a way of parenting, because we become conscious of how we're saying things, how we're doing things, where we need to maybe step back and be like, oh, maybe I can question why I feel this is happening or why I'm so triggered by this thing. A lot of times, this is a little bit off topic, but a lot of times we're triggered by our children because we weren't allowed to do, say, or act in the way that our child is when we were that age. So something in us says, this is wrong. You can't do this. You're not allowed to throw a tantrum in the middle of the grocery store. That's wrong. You can't do this. So we get triggered and we're like, we can't have our 2-year-old throwing a tantrum in the grocery store. This isn't appropriate. It's like, but if you really logically think about it, like it's a 2-year-old, like they're like, I wanted this, I said no, or, like what's going on? There's always always something behind the behavior. And so back to a toddler story, I had a client who had a 3-year-old and a 9-year-old. And her toddler just started, she was throwing these massive tantrums. I think she was 2, like going into 3. And she was just throwing these massive tantrums. She was like, I don't know what to do with her. And she's like throwing things and slamming doors and, like what you think of like a teenager, and yelling and all these things. And like over probably about 3 sessions, we started talking, and it came up, she started watching a little boy who was just about a year younger than her toddler. And it all happened when she started taking care of this little boy at her house. And so she was seeking attention from her mom because her mom was now giving attention to someone else on the home. And so really like that was kind of the catalyst of her explosive behaviors. Sometimes it's starting school, sometimes it's another baby, sometimes it's a move. There's lots of different reasons why our kids shift behavior. Sometimes it's just cognitively, like they're just shifting through a new milestone. And so they're relearning the world and shifting things. And sometimes it's stuff going on with us and they're real sensitive. They pick up on our energy as well.
It's very true. It's, I think kids can read your mood and what's going on with you better than anybody else can at times.
Sometimes they teach us more than we teach them, I think.
Yeah.
Actually, not sometimes. I'd say
about
like
ourselves.
80%.
Say that last sentence again.
I feel like not sometimes, it's probably 80% they teach us more than we teach them, because they're so wise, and they don't have any other, they're just born, we're born with an innate knowing of who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're told that we can't be that way because it doesn't look good. Yeah. And that's part of that not conforming. Like if my kid's going to throw a tantrum or yell, I'm like, get it out, dude. Like, I don't care. Like, I don't care if other people, like, of course I don't want to be disruptive, but if we're outside and you throw a tantrum, like, I'm not going to let you do it in the grocery store. I'm just going to leave the store and go take you to the car. If we're out and a bunch of people, we'll take you to your room, but like, let it out. I'm not like this. Stop doing that. Don't be that way. Do that. That's why we get triggered. We're like, we can't do that. They're not allowed to be who they are. And they're just expressing themselves and they don't know any other way. So helping them. Yeah. And again, that problem solving prior to the problem. What are we, there's a lot that goes into what are we feeding them? How much sleep have they had? All of that makes a big difference in a child as well.
So this has been such a great conversation. I mean, can you leave like our audience with some tangible tips for how to parent in a way that helps them build that genuine connection with their kids, and how can they incorporate holistic health into it, and just some tips that they can take away from this?
Well, I'm going to go back to language. Is how are you speaking? What are you saying? One simple example is a lot of times is if a kid asks for a toy or something that they want. A common reaction is, we can't afford that, or that's expensive. When we shift to, we're just not going to, especially for like younger kids, like, we're going to leave that at the store today. We're not going to buy that right now. Like, our kids don't need to know our budget. They don't need to know whether they can afford it or it's expensive. If it's a teenager, and it is expensive and you literally can't buy it. Okay, that's awesome. I love that you want to do this. How can we work towards that? Have them help you problem solve. And you can do this with 2-year-olds too. If they're verbal, if they can talk to you and communicate with you, you can have them help you problem solve based on whatever, again, cognitively where they are. But when the way we speak to them is so huge. And because when we say it's too expensive, we can't afford it, they become 20, 30, 40-year-olds who have money issues, who can't, who end up in debt, who end up not being able to afford the things that they want to afford. And so we run, so our brain is divided into 2 parts, the conscious and the subconscious. And our conscious brain is about 5 to 10%, which is what we're having this conversation with. The subconscious is running the show. And we get these programs in the first 7 years of our lives. Like, walking is a fantastic program. Like, we need it every day. We don't need to relearn how to walk every day. It helps us for our whole life. But things like, this is too expensive, I can't afford it. What are we saying to ourselves when we drop something? Oh my gosh, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I did that. Or, when we put ourselves down, when we see a picture of ourselves and we say, oh, I look so terrible. Oh, look at my hair, look at my teeth. Our kids are listening and they're hearing these things. And then they start to believe that about themselves. So how do we want them to believe about themselves? Let's be the adult that we want our child to be, and model that behavior. And so sometimes it takes some really deep work and changing some really deep beliefs that have been sabotaging us, for lack of a better word, as adults. But sometimes it's just as simple as shifting your language. Let's not say no all the time. They hear no. I forgot the number of the statistic. I have it somewhere. But by the time they're 18, they hear no like 180,000 times or something, some kind of like crazy number. Instead of saying no, you can't have the cookie. You can have one tomorrow at lunch. No, you can't go to the playground. We'll go to the playground this weekend. What can you, just reframing our wording in those simple little ways. I feel tired. I feel angry. Not I am tired. I am angry. Those little things, like it makes a really huge difference in how we think about ourselves and how we see the world. And if we can help them, no matter what age they are, the sooner we start, the better. It's never too late, but the sooner we start, the better. And they don't have to reprogram it because it's already there. Like, they'll have this knowing, like, yeah, things are great. Like, I'm capable of doing things. I can problem solve. I can do hard things. And it won't feel so hard as an adult. They'll be able to, all the self-development books that a lot of us read, like, they'll already be ahead of the curve, which is the goal. And that's the next generation parenting.
Yeah. That's great. I love this. It's been so informative. So thank you for being with us today. We're going to put you backstage and we'll join you in a couple of minutes. But thank you so much for being here.
Sarah, awesome. Thank you again. Absolutely. It was such a pleasure. See you soon.
Same.
Whew, that was awesome. And I think it touched us more because we're parents as well.
Mm-hmm.
That was really, really great.
Yeah. And I think, what Sarah kept coming back to is so true. The language and how you speak with your kids, and not just the words you use, of course, super important, but also the tone you use. And I'm going to admitting my parenting flaws there, because we all have them. And I know that my daughter and I had this really close relationship, we still do, really close relationship in how we speak to each other. and I can be very sarcastic, and she picked up on that, and she's sarcastic with me. But, during certain age phases, kids do not understand sarcasm the way we do. So there were times when that sarcasm would be bordering to not a nice way to speak to each other. So we had to have those conversations and try to even out, okay, I get what you're trying to do because I'm doing the same thing. And I obviously it's coming back to bite me in my behind right now, But this is the meaning of it, and this is what we're doing. So you can't push it past that line kind of thing.
Yeah.
So it's all in how you say it and the words you use and setting the example.
Yeah, and she said something, it's still staying to the language, and I think the language is really that one word out of this whole conversation that's going to really help a parent. Include the fun. It's going to give you less overwhelm, get more aligned on the personal values that you have, but that language also, it changes that conversation dynamic. It creates better relationships. And I really like the fact that, just that sentence she said, words can eliminate the problems. Same thing with as business owners, right? It's the same thing, right? Yeah, no, I really love that. And, also very important as business owners is not to forget that, and not just business owners, really any human being, but especially us as business owners, because we work from home and all that, it's self-care.
Yeah.
If we don't take care of us, how can we really take care of the kids fully, right?
Yeah. And that goes to our emotions too. And like Sarah said, really how we connected with ourselves and what space are we in. And like you said, self-care. If we are not in a good place, then we're not in a great place to set examples. We're not in a great place to be a guide to anyone, really. And that also plays a huge part in the business world. I mean, all of this really does. The communication, the language, the self-care, how you interact with people, and what kind of examples, what kind of leader can you be, right? And if we lead from our emotions and we're not in a good emotional space, that's not going to go anywhere good.
Yep.
So it's important to really be aware of your emotions and when it's a good time to address things versus taking that step back and say, okay, let's pause this and we'll come back to it and deal with it when we're in a better emotional space, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved one of the tips that she said at the end, because we live like this is how I do it most of the time. But now that I've heard it again, I'm going to do it more. It's really to have our kids help us problem solve.
Yeah.
Right. The way that we speak to them, it is key. It's not just saying no. It's okay. How can we make it better? Right. And it affects my life, their life, and anybody who's watching. Right. And I believe it's also contagious. So like when you're at the park or you're at the grocery store or wherever you are and other parents hear you, they'll be like, oh, that child didn't scream like mine did the way that I reacted. Right. So yeah, no, this was really great.
And I think one thing we didn't get into too much now, maybe we need to bring Sarah back for another session, but she spoke about it in the beginning on how a child's brain develops over the years and what they can actually understand and what makes sense to them, which I think is also very important. Like when you talk about toddlers throwing tantrums, everybody's aware of that. Yes, that's what toddlers do because they can't communicate well. They throw tantrums, terrible twos and all that. And then you kind of go through a phase where, but in my mind, that's when they're kind of trying to be independent. They're establishing that I can do things. I can't communicate well, but I can do things. Let me do things. Absolutely. And I feel like they go through a phase where they're super independent or trying to be. I can dress myself. I know what I want. I know what I want to eat. And, asserting their independence. Then I feel like they recess a little bit. Now they're like, well, I wish I was a baby again. I wish I was, the little girl, the little boy. So mommy, can you do this for me? Can you do this for me? Can you cut this for me? Can you clean this for me? And they can't do anything all of a sudden. And then you come to the teenage phase, and now they're right back to asserting their independence. It's like you go through these ups and downs, and sometimes as a parent, it's hard to hang on to that roller coaster.
Absolutely, absolutely. But I mean, again, every age has its differences, and just because your 15 or 14-year-old is not going to be the same as my 14-year-old when she was 14, right? It's so different, and every person is different. It's and that was something, like as parents, we kind of know that, but it's a nice reminder that Sarah was saying, because when we're at the grocery store and we see other parents, we don't know what goes on in their house. We don't know what, right? So it's very individualized. It was really wonderful, really something different that we do. This is great. So let's do this. So guys, we thank you guys for coming here. Make sure that you keep in touch with Anita and myself to learn what else is going on, with the opportunities for, additional information and to learn from us. Don't miss it on any of our future episodes. You can find a copy of this recording on YouTube. It's our Impactful Business Voices channel. So please support us and click the subscribe button so you can get notified whenever we have one every week.
And next Tuesday is the last Tuesday of the month. So it's going to be our monthly business lounge episode, where Nancy and I spend some time just talking about important topics that every business owner needs to know. We promised you last month that this month we're going to talk more about creating your ideal customer profile, how important it is, how it's going to benefit you as a business owner, and how to go about finding and identifying your ideal customer. So join us next Tuesday to get real takeaways so you can incorporate and implement in your business.
Awesome. Until next week, guys, go make an impact.
Thank you for listening to Impactful Business Voices. Subscribe now and don't miss an episode.